Hi everybody, this is Jen Gardner and we are in week 10 and we are talking about poetry this week. I thought it would be fun to talk about Shel Silverstein, who is a poet and an author of other books, and he was a songwriter and he did other things. So whether you like him or not, he does have his own quirky little way, and he has some interesting drawings, but I thought he would be good to talk about poetry, as he wrote a lot of poetry books and he has some good illustrations that are interesting to kids. So first, I want to talk about why we have poetry and why poetry is important to children. I found this really good quote about poetry, and what it says is that poetry uses devices such as meter and rhyme, and it's important to the structure of how words stick in our minds, and it can be a great way to improve our language skills and our word association. So it's important for children to hear poetry, and it can help them realize how to speak better, which I didn't know or even thought about. Another quote I found that I liked was how poetry promotes literacy. It helps children not only to learn language, but it helps them to want to read that language. And it also can cross literary boundaries. So when we think about books, sometimes poems can help us associate the words and help us put the story together, which I hadn't thought about either. Really thought about, but I can see how that might be with, poems reaching boundaries, just like the great Gilly Hopkins when she read poems that were given to her by the neighbor. At first she thought it was a little dumb, but then later she tried to realize or think about the poems and what they might mean. So it can give us greater insight to things. And this is all taken from an article from Elena Aguilar, which it's just about reasons for poetry. So I highly recommend just reading that. I thought it was really good. So about Shel Silverstein, he was born in 1930 and he died in 1999. So he lived quite a while. He died of a heart attack. He was a military man. He served in the U.S. Army in Japan and Korea. Things I didn't know about him: he won 2 Grammy Awards for some of his songs. He was nominated for a Golden Globe and an Academy Award, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know that either about him. A lot of people have said he had his own quirky style that came across as a little strange, and at first people didn't know how to react towards him, but he wanted to be laid back and conversational to people. He was not afraid to bring out new ideas to people that maybe were a little out there or a little rough around the edges. So he wasn't afraid to even use profanity or slang or things like that, draw weird pictures, because he wanted to kind of get people thinking. He is quoted as saying, "What I do is good. I wouldn't let it out if I didn't think it was." So he thought that the books that he created were good pieces of artwork for mankind, and so I kind of like that he stood by his work. He thought it was, worth publishing. One thing that a lot of people think about when they think about him is The Giving Tree. It was his best-selling novel. However, I didn't know this, but it wasn't his favorite. His favorite was Uncle Shelby's ABZ, A Giraffe and a Half, The Sophisticated and the Simple. So I decided to check that out at the library and read that. And anyways, I thought that was interesting. So he says he encourages people to finds something to identify with his books. He wants his art and his poetry and his songs to kind of give people some sort of personal sense of discovery, which is kind of what happened with the book, the required reading that we had with the big piece of O. It kind of stemmed conversations and thought processes and things like that that maybe we hadn't thought about with just a circle and a triangle. So that's kind of what he wanted to do with his poetry. So one of his most famous poetry books is Where the Sidewalk Ends, and that's one of my favorites. I loved this book. He also wrote A Light in the Attic, which is another really popular one. These are some poems that I picked from there. It says, "My guitar, oh, wouldn't it be most wondrous thing to have a guitar that could play and sing by itself? What an absolute joy it would be to have a guitar that didn't need me." So you can see in his artwork, he is kind of strange. I mean, here he is drawing a guitar that can play by itself, and you know, his artwork is a little abstract and brash and just things that maybe you wouldn't expect from a children's book, like this one, How to Not to Have to Dry the Dishes. If you have to dry the dishes, such an awful boring chore. If you have to dry the dishes instead of going to the store. If you have to dry the dishes and you drop one on the floor, maybe they won't let you dry the dishes anymore. So another thing about his poetry was he was kind of pushing the controversial limit, you know, teaching children different ideas. So in this poem, the little child is encouraged to drop a dish so that it won't have to do chores anymore. And so that was kind of how he was controversial in a time when maybe people weren't even thinking about that. They were following the rules to the limit, and he didn't do that. Another poem is Woulda, Coulda, Shoulda. All the woulda, coulda, shouldas laying in the sun, talking about the things they woulda, coulda done. But those woulda, coulda, shouldas all ran away and hid from one little did. Scale. If only I could see the scale, I'm sure that it would state that I've lost ounces, maybe pounds, or even tons of weight. You'd better eat some pancakes, you're skinny as a rail. I'm sure that's what the scale would say if I could see the scale. They say I have. They say I have my mother's nose, my grandfather's eyes, my mother's hair. Could it be that my behind's the only thing that's really mine? Sarah Sylvia Cynthia Stout would not take the garbage out. Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. She'd scour the pots and scrape the pans, candy the yams and spice the hams. And though her daddy would scream and shout, she simply would not take the garbage out. I won't read the whole poem on that one, but that is such a cute poem. I highly recommend that one that you go and check out. So thank you for watching my presentation. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you got a little bit interested in Shel Silverstein and his poetry, and maybe you'll go and check out one of his books. Have a great day. Thanks.